This chart shows the accumulation of American credit card debt in the lead up to Donald Trump's victory. During the COVID era, stimulus checks helped many Americans pay back debt, but by late 2024, that trend had done a U-turn. Credit card debt had climbed to an all-time high of $1.2 trillion, far above the $930 billion peak during the pandemic. And it wasn't just credit cards. Student loans, mortgages, and car loans were all hitting new highs as well. Between January and September of 2024, $46 billion in credit card debt had been written off. It represented a 50% jump from the previous year and the worst default rate since the 2008 financial crash. Bear in mind, all of this was going on before Trump's return to the Oval Office, before the so-called Liberation Day tariffs, and before a new age of trade wars. The average American household was already under massive financial strain. But last month, President Trump announced sweeping new tariffs on just about everything. The idea was to fix America's trade deficit and fight back against countries accused of unfair trade practices. In theory, it's reciprocal. In reality, not so much. Take Vietnam for instance. It was accused of imposing 90% tariffs on US imports. But that's just not true. The average tariff rate imposed by Vietnam is actually closer to 5%. Having said that, the US does have a large trade deficit with Vietnam, which simply means it buys more from them than it sells back. But as we'll discuss shortly, this should not be a surprise, and has nothing to do with fairness. That said, most of America's trade partners have been hit with a 10% baseline tariff. Countries running bigger trade surpluses, i.e. those that sell more to the US than they buy from them, were hit with steeper rates. Quite clearly, China is the main target here. It's the only country to face even higher tariffs despite the 90-day pause. But China isn't phased. They've responded with a 125% tariff on all American goods entering the country, making Chinese markets almost inaccessible to US companies. Meanwhile, global stock markets saw some of their worst days in recent memory. In just 48 hours, some $6 trillion in global market value just vanished into thin air. Before the 90-day pause, firms like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan had warned that the United States was on the verge of economic recession. Now, while it's true that the stock market isn't the real economy, the American economy relies more than ever on the top 10% of earners, who now account for half of all spending, and whose spending patterns are disproportionately affected by movements in the stock markets. On the flip side, tariffs can help to onshore the production of certain goods, but that only works for things that can actually be made domestically. Take coffee for instance. Naturally, the United States doesn't grow a lot of coffee beans, and most are imported from elsewhere. Having said that, coffee-producing countries like Colombia and Brazil were hit with tariffs. For the consumer, this simply means paying higher prices than before. This is why tariffs are inflationary. You see, the tariff is paid by the company importing the goods, not the country exporting them. In turn, these costs end up getting passed to the consumer. Think of it like this. You have a trade deficit with your local grocery store, which simply means you buy more from your grocery store than they buy from you. By Trump's logic, this is a problem. You should be able to sell as much to your grocery store as you buy from them. So to fix this, you begin to charge your family members a tax for buying from that grocery store. It doesn't really make sense. Anyway, to make matters worse, tariffs are what's known as a regressive tax, as opposed to a progressive tax. Progressive taxes, you see, are those that increase as the amount of taxable money increases. Income tax, for instance, is a progressive tax. The more you earn, the more you pay. Regressive taxes, on the other hand, do the opposite. If the price of a good increases by, say, 20%, everybody, including billionaires, feels the same price increase. Obviously, this impacts the middle and working class more than it does the billionaires. But maybe there's a silver lining. Trump has promised that this policy will single-handedly revive American manufacturing. The philosophy is that by making imports more expensive, American manufacturers will face less competition from cheap foreign products. This is called reshoring. Over time, it builds a more resilient economy with more jobs and more stable supply chains. But factories don't just appear overnight. Reshoring takes years, if not decades. For manufacturers, the tariffs would mean either paying more to import material or passing the cost on to consumers. Take steel, for instance. Back in March, the price of American steel rose to $924 per metric ton. That's a 17.8% increase from the month before. This might be good for steel producers, but there's a caveat. For every job in steel production, about 80 others depend on it. So when the price of steel hikes, industries that use it are put under massive financial pressure. Without a serious strategy, it's hard to see how the United States would quickly scale up production to replace imports. But let's say a wave of new factories did magically appear across the country. Even if the demand for blue-collar jobs went up, the workforce still wouldn't be there. According to workforce giant Manpower Group, 71% of US employers said they couldn't find enough skilled workers, up from 40% last decade. Even with rising wages, most young people are moving into the service and tech industries and aren't lining up to work in factories. To make matters worse, strict immigration policies under the Trump administration have only exacerbated the labour shortage by reducing the pool of foreign workers. Adding insult to injury, nobody knows how long these tariffs would last, what recipient countries must do to get rid of them, or whether they'll go up or down in the future. Bloomberg's so-called Trade Policy Uncertainty Index was literally off the charts when the tariffs were announced, the highest it's ever been. Uncertainty is terrible for an economy, since it encourages consumers and businesses to hide their money away rather than investing or spending. It's also terrible for Trump's stated goal of reindustrialization. After all, reindustrializing America would require literally trillions of dollars of sustained investment. Manufacturing projects usually demand years of planning and massive upfront costs. Right now, there's little confidence in whether the tariffs will remain in place or not, and so long as that's the case, businesses will, understandably, continue to hold off on their investments. Of course, none of this was really supposed to happen. Aside from protecting American industry, the Trump administration promised that tariffs would bring in enough money to fund trillions of dollars in tax cuts. Peter Navarro, the intellectual driving force behind all this, claimed that tariffs could bring in about $6 trillion in revenue over the next decade. Economists, however, are not buying it. Yale's Budget Lab, for instance, predicts the real number is closer to $3.1 trillion, almost half of what the government's claiming. The problem is that as tariffs drive up the price of imported goods, the demand for these goods goes down. If the demand goes down, the volume of imported goods also goes down, which means lower revenues. Now, if the volume of imports falls too much and tax cuts are too aggressive, the US risks piling on more debt, which in turn makes borrowing more expensive, as the government has to offer high returns on bonds to attract investors. Anyway, what this means is that future governments will likely end up having to either just raise taxes again or cut government spending. Sooner or later, it will be the US taxpayer who will pay the price. Not to mention that Musk's Doge, the department responsible for slashing government spending, is failing to make a dent in the US budget. But even if the tariffs were meant as a temporary fix, history tells a different story. Once locked in, they tend to remain in place even after their original purpose is served. This is because industries that benefit from protectionism begin lobbying to keep it, which reduces competition and stifles innovation. A good example of this is the so-called chicken tax. In 1964, the Lyndon B. Johnson administration imposed tariffs on trucks imported from West Germany and France, in response to European tariffs on American poultry. Because of this, foreign manufacturers stopped exporting trucks to the US, and over time this allowed American ones such as Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler to effectively monopolize the US truck market. Competition is what fuels innovation. With little in the way, American manufacturers had no real incentive to improve their vehicles or lower costs for the consumer. In any case, tariffs are a tool, not a cure-all. Use them carefully, you can strengthen your nation's economy. Use them recklessly and you'll do the opposite. Should these tariffs go into effect, it won't be America standing up for itself. It'll be America isolating itself whilst driving up wealth inequality in the process. So whilst Trump's concerns may carry some truth, look beyond the headlines and you'll find a host of risks that run much deeper than the administration is willing to admit. After all, building a fortress may keep the dangers out, but it can just as easily trap you inside. I hope you managed to learn a thing or two from this video. A lot of effort goes into making them, and if you haven't yet subscribed, now would be a good time to do so. Don't forget to also hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content, and any suggestions for future videos would be much appreciated. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.